Welcome to RSP Cast number 6. I'm Billy Joe Dupree, and I'm here with my guest tombstone, Rich Jackson. No, actually, it's my buddy John Oning, who I thought what I wanted to bring on for this show about craft, because John has an interesting background and some skill sets that I think are appealing to folks who love sports, and especially who love MMA, and as well as, people who obviously love football, because John does excellent work. He's an analyst who's done work at FanRag. He's someone that I've seen him work with NDT Scouting and do some work with those guys. And he's been a frequent guest on the RSP film rooms, breaking down edge rushers with me over the past few years. So John, welcome back to the show. It's great having you.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to delve into the world of jiu-jitsu and football. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about, share a little bit about your background in terms of, what you do with the martial art right now, and then also how you got into it.
Yeah, well, I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since about midway through 2009. For those of you who don't know, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a ground grappling centered art for ground fighting. It was developed in the early 1900s. It comes from judo, and one of the premier judo instructors from Japan came over to Brazil and was teaching his art, the judo art, to them. But this family called the Gracie family, who anybody that follows MMA knows about the Gracie family, the premier family, the first family of jiu-jitsu, the originators of jiu-jitsu, they were smaller and less athletic and less powerful athletes as Conde Coma was, who was coming over. So they, in turn, adjusted the judo techniques to work on the ground more. And the philosophy behind that is, when you're standing up and you're striking with somebody, the person who is larger, has a longer reach, and more powerful strikes will win most of the time, because it's really difficult for people with no training, or even with a little bit of training, to inhibit force. I mean, we've seen it all when you watch those World Star Hip Hop videos of the bigger guys knocking out people with one punch and all of that stuff. And the concept around jiu-jitsu is bringing that to the ground, because it mitigates their ability to throw powerful strikes that can separate you from your consciousness. So first of all, on the ground, it gives a better advantage to smaller people. And the reason why that smaller people have an advantage on the ground is because of technique uses of levers, all types of different really nuanced details that allow smaller people to be effective against people that are stronger, more explosive, maybe faster, better athletes. It's a way to just make things, give the slighter, less athletic people a chance in a self-defense situation. And so I got into it, jumping next into how I got into it in 2009. I was really, really, really overweight. I was 275 pounds. I was playing football. I had a lot of knee troubles. I had 2 knee surgeries by the time I was a junior in high school. So I was having a lot of issues. And then as soon as I started jiu-jitsu, and another thing, I was getting bullied and picked on a lot. I lacked confidence. I lacked the ability to defend myself. I lacked the confidence to defend myself, even if I had the ability to defend myself, because I was a big guy. And jiu-jitsu really just made that turn a 180 on me. I lost the weight. I got down to 190 pounds within 7 months. By the time I hit college, I was already at 180, 185 pound range. So it was really just a beneficial experience for me. Then since then, I've just been doing it. I've been growing as a competitor. I've won competitions that have sent me to Abu Dhabi. I've placed at big tournaments such as the Pan American Championships. I've made it to the quarterfinals of the World Championships on multiple occasions. And yeah, so since then, I've been teaching jiu-jitsu since about 2016-ish, since when I got my couple years after I got out of college. And then now I'm just training a lot while doing my writing, training, teaching, trying to help people compete. We just had the World Championships last week, which was fun. Interesting to see all my teammates go compete and see how their skills match up with the best in the world. It's really exciting.
I had no idea about him. And I met you probably about 4 or 5 years ago at the Senior Bowl. And if you had told me that you were at 275 pounds at one time, I would have thought you were joking with me. Now you're like participating in the Pan American Games and teaching, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So let's talk about how this applies to the way that you study football, because I mean, you're a graduate of the Scouting Academy. You've certainly done some really great work with us on the RSP Film Room, talking about, why players like Joey Bosa were going to be good in the NFL. And I know that some people go, well, no, duh, that's kind of like, but you never quite know. And being able to articulate why a player is going to be good and what makes him good is another, it's another level other than just looking at somebody athletically and saying, well, that's obvious. So tell us about why some of these things apply so well for football, and why we're seeing some things in the news like Chuck Liddell, working with the Browns, and we can get into the whole Liddell Browns thing in a minute, but just first talk about, tell us a little bit about why you find Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu matching up well with individual football techniques.
Well, there's a few reasons. The first major reason is conceptually for me as an evaluator, it really helped me understand what it takes for an athlete to become elite in their sport. Jiu-Jitsu is different from football in this concept that we're not picking from the top 1% of the athletes in the world. There's a lot of we have great athletes in the sport, but there's a lot more normal people, people that are just doing it to get in shape. People are just doing it to be able to defend themselves, type of thing. So it really puts a stark contrast onto what it takes to become elite, the best, the black belt world champions, the guys that are fighting in the UFC, becoming the best fighters in the world. It really showed me how important the nuances and the details are for the people at the highest levels, which is the NFL level, which is what I equate to black belt world championship competitive level jiu-jitsu practitioners. It takes so much time. It takes so much effort. It takes so much repetition and so much focus on the details to become great. It just really put into perspective of what these guys are doing. And it really, in my head, helped emphasize how easy and how difficult it will be for players to improve on certain segments of their game. That's I think the number one, if there was a one thing that really helped me individually with evaluating, it was that, just the conceptual knowledge of what it takes to become elite at a particular task or a particular sport. Because I was training around guys that were winning world championships, that were, training twice a day, 2-hour sessions with weightlifting, with conditioning on top of it, while watching film and breaking down meticulously the micro movements or the macro movements that are necessary to win on any given match. And that is very similar to what the people in the NFL have to do. Even though it's a team game, it's not an individualized sport like jiu-jitsu is. There are a lot of parallels in that sense. And then, oh, sorry, you were going to go.
No, and that's interesting that you brought that up, the micro movements, because I think a lot of fans and even I think writers sometimes miss out on how important those micro details are to the difference between a guy who's simply fighting to make an NFL roster and someone who's an all-pro player. And when we evaluate guys, and oftentimes you'll see this in the public sphere, where when we share our work and break down something that's very minute, invariably you're going to get someone that says that, I think you're overthinking it. There's too much, that's too detailed. They can't be looking at it on that level. But you've just highlighted that in a completely different sport, they do the exact same thing.
Yeah. And it's not consciously. You're not thinking like, say I'm in jiu-jitsu, I'm not consciously thinking like, oh, his hand's doing this, his hand's doing that. So his hand's grabbing my collar, I have to break the collar, and then I have to shove it down, break it at his hip point, and do all these different, I'm not consciously thinking that, I'm reacting. But the reason why I can react is because I practiced, I repped those things so many times, thousands and thousands of times, that I can unconsciously perform those actions, which is exactly what NFL players are doing on every given moment. One thing, like you mentioned, the Joey Bosa thing we do, the thing that I'm very proud of what we did there is we focused on the micro movement of Joey Bosa's toes and his footwork when he's going around the edge. And I think that's an area that if you look at him, when we looked at him when he was at Ohio State, and if you look at him now, he's totally different. He's totally revamped and improved his game there. And I'm just really proud that we pointed that out, because that's an area that I didn't see anybody point out through the entire draft process. And I think that's a issue we see a lot in the draft evaluation game. You see quarterbacks and a lot of the offensive skill positions get broken down into that minute detail, and even offensive linemen too, but you rarely see the minute details with defensive linemen, with, linebackers and stuff, where you look at how important those micro movements are, where their toes are pointed in their stance, how high is their butt in their stance, where's their hand placed, how much is their weight distributed on one foot instead of the other, how do the different stances dictate what a pass rusher is going to do, and how does it mitigate, how does it hurt him if he's trying to do this, or help him if he's trying to do this. All those types of things just intertwine so well with jiu-jitsu. I can wrap my head around it so easily because there's so many parallels in jiu-jitsu that I'm going through on a daily basis. Like right after we leave this, I'm going to be going to jiu-jitsu and trying to workshop a certain move that I've had in my head for a week, 2 weeks, that I'm trying to fine tune and make it so that it can work against the best of the best. And I think that's a lot of what NFL players are doing as well.
It's interesting because, when you talked about overcoming, being able to use leverage and overcoming power, it seems like that would be the case with defensive linemen trying to work past certain bigger tackles and guards and being able to, use leverage or certain types of movements or hand patterns to be able to overcome being overpowered in that fashion. So if you don't mind, share, we've talked a lot about linemen already at this point, but in addition to, maybe touching upon some of the techniques where there are some parallels there, give us some idea about other positions where jiu-jitsu type of techniques or concepts could be useful and have been useful or could be useful for, other positions on the football field.
Yeah. The biggest thing is jiu-jitsu is gonna go well with any type of situation in football where two opponents are in close proximity to each other. So obviously offensive, defensive line, like you said, that's places where jiu-jitsu is going to go. But linebacker attacking an offensive lineman at the point of attack, trying to shed blocks, a defensive back or a wide receiver trying to beat press with a defensive back. A lot of those areas are very similar to what we do in jiu-jitsu in a sequence we call grip fighting, which is fighting for grips on our gi, which is basically the clothing that we are wearing to simulate clothing in real life, but it just needs to be more durable so that we can use it on a day by day by day by day basis. So in those situations, what you want to do is you want to attack the joints. You want to attack the wrists, the elbows, because those are the weak points for you to be able to break grips. And in our case, we want to break the grip so that we can get advantageous gripping sequences so that we can either throw them on the ground or manipulate their movement in somehow. But in the case of wide receivers, they're using those points so that they can get past the person. And it's a much quicker version of jiu-jitsu, but what they're doing is still very similar to our grip breaks and dominating grip sequences that we are doing. And then sorry.
No, go ahead.
And then I was going to say the other one that we were discussing yesterday that I find fascinating is how it goes with playing quarterback. There are two particular guys that I train with on a weekly basis whose kids are in high school and they're both quarterbacks. And they have said that how much improvement their kids have had processing just the whatever stimuli they have on a particular play, they process it so much quicker since they've been going to jiu-jitsu, because in jiu-jitsu, if you think about it, it's kind of like chess with really bad physical Joe Rogan calls it chess with dire physical consequences. And if you think about it, that's exactly what it is, because if you don't process all the different stimuli going on and use it to your advantage, you're going to get into a position where you could die. if you get caught in a choke and you never tap and your opponent never lets go, which never happens, but in a self-defense situation, you could die, or if you get punched in the face, you could get punched in the face till you die. These are life and death situations that you're training for. So you have to be able to process information at such a quick clip that it really helps that when you go into football, which is different stimulus, you have 11 different defenders instead of just one person that you're focusing on, but you're still focusing on multiple different stimuli. You're focusing on their micro movements, and you're all doing this unconsciously. You're not consciously going through that because you don't have that much time. And that's how jiu-jitsu really relates to that. And just what they say is their kids have their productivity, they're only, I think one is entering his senior year now and the other one is becoming a sophomore. And they have just talked about how much better they have played and how much more productive they have been as quarterbacks since they started playing jiu-jitsu. And I think that's an interesting thing that should be researched or delved into deeper,
Yeah. And I think it's funny because there's so many parallels of things that I'd love to just kind of touch on in response to what you said, because the first is the Joe Rogan comment, because I wrote something about Brett Favre about 4 or 5 years ago. And I did this whole series on defending the planet at the RSP site.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And Brett Favre was my quarterback to defend the planet. And my whole analogy about playing quarterback was that it was like playing chess in a barroom brawl on biker night. And it was like this whole idea that, you were basically the person who, it was like chess, but that you could formulate a weapon out of the chess piece and physically do harm to your opponent. And so it was, who better to have that than someone who could really react in the moment and process things really fast. And I think that it just speaks also to performance in general. And I think that that's one of the underlying themes of this podcast, is that football, and especially quarterbacking, is a performance oriented craft. And whenever you're in front of people, competing, you're on a stage. And that means that oftentimes, there's an intensity of pressure that's there that's different than it is with practice, because you can do, you have do-overs in practice. You can call time out in practice. Exactly. There's, in a performance setting, it may not be life and death, but it has that feeling of pressure that's elevated from practice, that's somewhere in between, and some people overreact to it like it's life and death, which is why some people don't perform very well. But the whole idea of that, it's what you're discussing is very much a concept of improvisation. When you improvise music, it's, you're learning scales, you're learning how to get a good tone on your instrument, you're understanding theory about how notes work together, and which notes sound good together and which don't, and it's all in a very mathematical type of classification. But then when you get up on stage and perform with 3 or 4 other people, and you're playing a song and it has a certain form and understanding of those rules that you're going to be working with that are kind of boundaries, even then you may have learned all these different lines that sound good within that structure, and you're making things up as you go along in a certain way. But at the same time, you've practiced so much that it becomes, you make it musical, you make it sound good. You kind of you're not thinking about what you're going to play. You're just reacting to what you're hearing. And it's the same thing. It sounds like the very same thing with jiu-jitsu, and the same thing with football. And it's funny that you talk then also about the whole hitting the joints of the arms was interesting to me, because as someone who watches a lot of wide receivers, I've always noticed that the best guys were able to hit the top of the wrist or the crook of the elbow and really strike that arm so it got away. And then I couldn't, when we talk about the gi, all I can think about is that play when Steve Smith was with the Ravens against the Bengals at the end of the game, where I remember thinking this, I'd love to get your opinion about this if you remember, but there's a play like at the end of the game where he catches a fairly long pass and he's running down the sideline, and a Bengal is literally in front of him, a cornerback, but he reaches out and grabs the guy by the jersey, by the collar, with a stiff, kind of with his stiff arm, and then jerks him at an angle to the ground that I just thought, how strong must he be to do that? But I think it must be about leverage, but it didn't look like he had a leverage advantage in that situation. Do you remember that play?
Yeah, you're talking about the one with Pac-Man, right? Where he stiff
Yeah.
armed him, through him to the ground. Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of that, what he used Pac-Man's momentum against him. So Smith and Pac-Man were both traveling on the same line towards the touchdown because Pac-Man was chasing Steve Smith. So when Steve Smith reached behind to grab, he
That's it.
grabbed around the chest plate and he threw him forward over, and he got hit. The key is he grabbed high right underneath the face mask. So when you grab high against the face mask, it's easy to pull someone off their balance, off their center of gravity. So especially since they're moving in a forward line and you grab high at a high leverage point to where you could get their center of gravity over the top of their feet, or their head over the top of their center of gravity with the momentum combined. That's why he was able to throw Pac-Man in such a violent manner. It's actually really not that difficult. And people a lot weaker can do that to a lot stronger people if you have them in that same scenario. The key was that just Pac-Man was unaware of the hand coming up so high on his person. If he was able to keep that lower, he would have been fine. But he let the hand come up closer to his neck, which made it easier for Steve Smith just to pull him off a center of gravity and fall on his face.
That makes total sense. And I thought, and that's why I didn't understand and got it wrong, because he was trailing him and he grabbed and pulled him. And because they were moving in the same direction and he's moving forward, and he just encouraged him to go forward more. And he had that leverage at the high end. That makes total sense.
Now the difference is the ones like Marion Barber back in the day, where he would just grab somebody and legitimately just throw them with all of his upper body force and might. And that is just an explosive athlete doing explosive things. There wasn't much technique to that. It's just explosive power.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's funny how much we think about power and when we talk about players, and especially running backs. So, I hear a lot about, oh, he's so strong, he's got so much power. But it seems to me the best running backs have leverage. They understand how to use leverage, because it's about pad level, how they've got their hips bent at a certain angle when they're running, and they keep their head up when they're making contact, as opposed to running with their head down. Like a guy like I always heard was strong but never played strong was guys like Darren McFadden and Tevin Coleman, because whenever they hit somebody in a pile or headed towards them, their head went down. And then, why is it that when the head goes down and you make contact, that you just fall flat on your face? What's the physics behind that, or the leverage ones behind that?
It's a lot of it is like your core strength, your core integrity, being able to keep your structure, your spinal integrity correct. So being able to maintain posture. Once your head comes down, your back rounds. And when your back rounds, it is not in an optimal place to explosively move in any direction. If you think about it, go squat. Get in a normal squat, do your normal squats, and then try to do a squat with your head down, with a rounded back. You'll see how much more difficult it is. You will be able to do so much less percentage of your 1 rep max with a rounded back. It's really unbelievable. I've done it on a few occasions with friends at the gym. It's really a fun experiment to do, so you can see like how much form matters. And we have a saying in jiu-jitsu that's really interesting that correlates well with your point is show me an explosive and powerful person, and I will show you someone who gets tired quickly. Show me somebody who can use leverage, and that is somebody who will kick your ass. Show me somebody that has power and leverage, and that person can be unstoppable.
Kind of like Daniels of Green Bay, the former Iowa wrestler, would be a good example of having both.
Exactly. You want to be able to power and explosiveness by itself is great, but it actually is a hindrance, because to become such a powerful and explosive athlete, it takes a certain cardio threshold. It takes a certain amount of endurance away from you. So if you're just a power and explosive athlete without technique, all you are is a vessel that's going to get tired very, very quickly.
Huh.
So if you have leverage, if you have the ability to use leverage, use technique, use the correct, form, then you will maximize and efficiently use that power in a way that not only allows you to have longer endurance and be able to use that explosive, fast twitch muscles on a much more frequent basis. Frequent and efficient basis.
And that makes sense. And it's funny because and that kind of also answers a question that's kind of we left lingering about quarterback play and why that's important, because not only are you, if you're aware of your body and you're able to use micro movement technique that's efficient and explosive, then it affords you more time to see the field. And there's such one of the things that I'm reading that I would recommend to any football junkie is Dub Maddox's R4 system. It's something I've been studying over the past couple of years, just very kind of gradually incorporated into what I do. But the whole idea is, taking existing offenses and creating an overlay system that makes it more efficient to look at things. And what he does really cool, John, that I just kind of want to share real quick is that he kind of gives an example of saying, okay, he lays out all these numbers like in seemingly random fashion on a page and says, okay, circle as many as you can in a minute, and I remember the first time I did it, I think I got through like 14 or 15 of them. And he said, if you did like 20, you were doing really well. And then he said, now I want you to draw, a vertical and a horizontal axis in the middle of the page where they intersect. And now you have 4 different blocks. And what if I tell you that one of the things that you can learn is that you can go around in a circle in clockwise fashion or counterclockwise fashion, I don't remember which one, and that the numbers will be in that circular order. Next thing you know, I'm like circling 40 or 50 in a minute. And the whole idea is that once you find out kind of like how to create a certain set of boundaries, and these are things that you're going to be operating by of standards, and then create a system to be able to look at things fairly quick, and assess the situation, you're going to solve problems faster. And that in fact, the more information you have sometimes actually can slow you down. There's kind of a diminishing returns level about information. It's more about, you have certain sets. And once you do that, even if something new or something that seems unfamiliar systematically is presented to you, it still applies to your system if you've got the right system and you can work with that. And that's where quarterbacking really falls into play, because it's assessing certain things with defensive backs and linebackers and cornerbacks, that triangle of players, pre-snap and post-snap. And if you can identify it in the system well, you can kind of create your solutions faster, even with bodies flying around you. And I think I can see how jiu-jitsu with that movement and that awareness and just kind of the subtlety of detail can really help someone be more confident with processing information.
And I think a key, like that awareness, as you said, is key for quarterbacks, especially when they're in a muddy pocket. There's bodies around them. You have to maintain a balanced posture. You have to maintain a center of gravity that's hard to inhibit while being able to process all the different stimuli for the coverage, to find the open receiver. And that's not even making the throw yet, all the mechanics and different things that go into that. It helps in so many ways, because in jiu-jitsu, when you're on top of somebody trying to get around their legs, it takes a ton of awareness of what they're doing, awareness of where your body positioning is and what they're doing to inhibit your body position. So the little minute micro movements you can make to re-establish your body positioning and form and all of that fun stuff. It's amazing how many correlations there are between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's kind of wrap this up on a lighter note here. I saw this week that the Cleveland Browns were training with getting some work with Chuck Liddell, and it seems like the Browns are doing a lot of kind of like photo opportunity PR related stuff. When I think about, no stripes on their helmets, they're going to be on the HBO special, series this year. But you've got Hugh Jackson jumping in Lake Erie, which I would not recommend to anybody who wants to have all their body parts stay intact and not be dissolved by. But no, I'm sure they've cleaned that lake up since I was there. But my first experience seeing the body water was Lake Erie in the 1970s, and what I remember was a dead sunfish and some floating debris. And that was like as a 4-year-old. I should have known that at that point. Being a Clevelander, you were kind of cursed, But to be serious, Chuck Liddell, obviously, a terrific champion in MMA, known very much as a striker. but obviously had to have some level of, ground game efficiency to subsist in a, and perform well in a format like the MMA. But, how much of this is, PR opportunity, how much of what Liddell can do is very useful. And because you hear some people who say, of course it's going to be useful because he was a champion and he at least has a base level knowledge of this. But on the other end, you got people who are like, well, was he really the right choice for this?
Yeah, in my opinion, it was 95% for pictures and fun stuff, because if you were really looking to make your players better and to get applicable training methods and trading modalities from MMA, Chuck Liddell would not be the person you would go to. He's been out of the sport for so long. He hasn't been training at the high elite levels, and he doesn't have the type of technical and nuanced style that would lend itself best to be explained and taught to football players. Now, if they brought in a great coach such as like Greg Jackson who's coaches out in New Mexico, who's one of the top 3 or 4 best coaches in MMA, or, a high level technical fighter such as like Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, or John Jones, or guys like Conor McGregor, they're all better because they're more up to date in the games. A lot of what Chuck Liddell was showing them were outdated modalities, and he wasn't even teaching them properly. Like I don't know if you saw the videos of them doing it. They were doing a Greco-Roman training technique where they're swimming their hands into the armpits constantly. Yeah. And it's supposed to help you to get double underhooks, because when you get double unders, you can control your opponent much better. And you saw them doing that. And but the problem is when they were doing it, you didn't see their feet move at all. Their feet are staying stationary, and that makes no sense. There is no situation in football where your upper body is going to be moving and your lower body is going to be staying still. It makes no sense. You're ingraining bad movement patterns into these football players' lives. And obviously it's one day for probably a couple hours for pictures. It's not going to make a difference at all, really, either way. But if the Browns are truly trying to get their players better, like they pass it off as being, then they would have had, better training modalities that actually, related to what they're doing in football. It really kind of irked me to see them doing these movements and not even bringing their lower half into it. It's creating bad movement patterns. In football, you always need your lower body to be firing, to be moving. You're an offensive lineman. You need to use your feet to help you drive your opponent back. Or if you're a defensive lineman, you need to use your feet to move, to get around, or a wide receiver to run your routes, or a defensive back to, follow, to cover the wide receivers, or a quarterback to drop back. You rarely ever see any movement patterns like that. And it just really irked me.
Yeah, because you stop your feet and you're dead. Yes, basically, exactly. On the play.
Exactly. So why are you teaching these guys to stop moving their feet? This is not a weighted or resisted thing where you're trying to improve their explosive power in their hips or anything. This is a drilling drill where it's supposed to ingrain positive movement patterns for you, and it's actually doing the exact opposite.
Well, this was definitely enlightening and enjoyable. I'm going to share the Joey Bosa RSP film room again for folks who missed it and get a chance to check out, within context of this podcast again about his feet and how they've improved, but you'll get a chance to see what John was talking about in even greater detail there. John does great work on Twitter. He's done some great work, with analysis of the Cowboys. I would highly recommend following him. And John, give everybody your Twitter address.
Yeah, you guys can follow me at John Owning, JOHNOWNING. We're talking a lot of fun stuff about pass rushing, about the Cowboys. If you want to come to an account that's going to dive into the minute details of pass rushing and line play, I'm the guy.
Yes, he is. Absolutely. And couldn't recommend him more. It's been a joy to have you on once again, John. And, thanks for joining us. This is the RSP Cast, episode 6. I am now available this podcast is now available to subscribe to on iTunes, on Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and I believe Blueberry. So you know, pretty much you can't miss it. You can go check it out. You know, Matt Waldman's RSP Cast. You can follow my blog at mattwaldmanrsp.com, and YouTube channel, the RSP Film Room, is the channel you want to check out there. So thanks again, everyone, for listening in. I've appreciated the feedback thus far, and on behalf of John and myself, Billy Joe Dupree, and Rich Tombstone Jackson. See you later.